This is the former England and Liverpool player John Barnes, who wrote a fascinating piece in the Telegraph a few days ago. Let's talk to him about that and taking the knee, whether it makes a difference still, and whether it is, John Barnes, a matter of individual conscience, which, if I boil down your argument this week, you seem to feel it is. It ought to be a matter of individual conscience for individual players, whether, if you're, Wilfried Zaha, you choose not to. If you're an England player, just mentioned one a moment ago with our correspondent there, you do. Is that going to work, really? Can individuals really make this choice on their own, in isolation?
Well, in terms of the gesture, yes, they can. In terms of the reality and the tangible difference that has to be made, taking a knee or not taking a knee is not going to do that. Rather than talking about whether we should be taking a knee or not taking a knee, we should be talking about what's being done for racial injustice, inequality in the inner cities, knife crime, and we have to see something being done. Because we're not seeing anything. All we're seeing is the conversation as to whether we should be taking a knee or not. And the longer this goes on, the more it detracts from the real issues of what we're actually trying to do. So, because what has happened in the last 20 years of passing the red card down the line in the Champions League is that all we're doing and nothing changes. So, as I said, we're wasting time arguing as to whether we should take a knee or not, rather than trying to do something about it.
John, something that, we've been seeing in the news recently a lot are stabbings, particularly across London, particularly amongst young black boys. And it always strikes me that we take for granted when we see that another young black kid has died on the streets. And, these are the kinds of conversations I want to be having that actually support these communities and tangibly help them in a material way. And that's why I'm always against these gestures, because they're quite empty. I mean, for you mentioned there that your focus is on what opportunities are there for black people and what should we be doing to have a material impact. What are the kinds of things, rather than just taking the knee, you think we should be doing?
Well, in relation to knife crime, as you just mentioned, if you look at the situation in Glasgow 10, 15 years ago, which was the knife crime capital of Britain, what did they do to stop that? And why did they do it? Because they felt that these youngsters, and they were working class white kids, they thought these youngsters were worthy enough for their concern, which then meant that whichever agencies, be it the councils, be it the government, be it individuals coming together to say enough is enough, they felt that those white working class youngsters were worthy for their concern, so something was done to clean it up. And look at it now. It's nowhere near the way it was. Why aren't we doing the same thing with our black youngsters? Rather than
there was a policy shift in Scotland, John, wasn't there, which they said we're going to treat it...
For something to be done.
Yeah, in Scotland they said we're going to treat knife crime almost as a public health problem.
It is. Not all
and can I just...
What it is, it's not a race problem.
Yes, and can I just say that in the recent Sewell Commission report that I sat on, which was deemed to be controversial, we said exactly this. We said that, knife crime should be treated as a public health issue. We should move to that approach. And so I do often wonder, when people are saying it's so controversial and awful, what recommendations do you disagree with is often what I ask them. They can't really, they don't really have a response for that.
John, I'm sure you don't remember, but 2 or 3 years ago I interviewed you when Liam Neeson, the actor, had said something controversial about race, and I was very struck at the time by the candour of your response, because, to paraphrase what you said at the time, it was that we just all need to get a bit real about talking about race. We need to be much more unbuttoned about it and far more honest about what people truly feel, and it's only through that we can properly ventilate some of the questions around it.
Well, just to give you an example, we assume that this is a binary choice. We assume that the ones booing are racist and the ones not booing aren't racist, and they want racial equality. I want the people who aren't booing, that doesn't mean that they're not racially biased. They're supporting England, but that doesn't mean they're not racially biased in other ways. So for us to automatically assume that if you're booing a racist and if you don't boo, you're not racist, or there are a few racists, or if you're Peter Brazier or Liam Neeson, you may be racially biased, but if you're not, or a lot of the commentators, a lot of my ex-colleagues are pundits who are quite binary in their choice. As long as you don't hear racist abuse means that it doesn't exist. These are the conversations we need to have. Because do we really believe in equality? Forget about race. Let's look at it from a gender point of view, from a sexuality point of view. And the fact is that we don't. But we have to understand why we don't. And we have to dismantle what we have been wrongly told about each other, be it black, be it female, be it gay. All of us have been conditioned to think in a negative way along a scale. It's not just either you are or you aren't. And until we dismantle what we have learned wrongly learned about different groups of people, this will continue. And we'll just point the finger at the ones who get caught and think if we get rid of the ones who get caught, then everything's going to be okay.
John, and one last question. Do you think, obviously they haven't said when they intend to stop taking the knee. Do you think it will get to a point where they almost overdo it, if I can use that word, so that it's counterproductive and people are almost, instead of wanting to talk about racism and how we can resolve it, people would just actually get fed up and then the whole thing would have just been counterproductive? You know, shouldn't there be an ending point?
I think there's a lot of people being disingenuous in terms of it being counterproductive, because the people who don't really want to address the issue of Black Lives Mattering and seeing the real issue, as you mentioned, with knife crime, with jobs, with unemployment, and they're using this whole Black Lives Matter movement in terms of defunding the police and tearing down statues as a reason to boo, whereas the players and the manager and the FA have said this is not what it's about. So therefore, why don't they just believe them and support the team? Because they have said this is not what it's about. So they're being quite disingenuous and using that as an excuse to just keep on doing what they're doing.
You say, John Barnes, you say it's an excuse, but there are those people who will argue that the gesture of taking the knee is so inextricably linked with Black Lives Matter. And, you know, we can rehearse what some of the things that Black Lives Matter stands for. Some of them we can all agree are very positive. Some of them are a little more nebulous and questionable, defunding the police. It's got a fairly nihilistic attitude towards capitalism. I personally wouldn't dream of booing if I'd been at Wembley yesterday, but I would go to the wall for the right of the people to express dissent in a democracy, and that's what they're doing. And they have to be given that right to make, as you would see it, make fools of themselves.
Well, first of all, they've been taking a knee for many years before Black Lives Matter movement came along. So why don't they look at that and say, well, this was around before Black Lives Matter, just talking about Black Lives Mattering and to highlight inequality. So why don't they go back further than Black Lives Matter and saying taking the knee was around before Black Lives Matter? And it's a positive thing in terms of, you know, just supporting injustice and inequality, be it race, be it gender. But of course, you can use it to whatever agenda that you want. And that's why I'm saying they're being quite disingenuous. Because, of course, if the players are saying it is not about that, you support us, Raheem Sterling, whoever else, we say this is not what it's about, why don't you support us in that?